Today's mailbag answers your questions, including, are the Braves done adding this offseason? Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, January 31st, your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. Best ways to support what we're doing over here, obviously, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the newsletter, free or paid. Those funds are what we use to pay for our trips to Atlanta to cover this team on an everyday basis. And I put out a call for mailbag questions, and I got some really good ones. So rather than do 12, 15 different questions and a rapid fire answer, I picked out 6 really good questions that we're going to go to and we're going to spend a little bit of extended time on. And the most pressing one that I got, and I thought probably the most relevant for everybody, was, are the Braves done adding this offseason? And my thoughts here, as compared to a lot of other people in Braves country, my thoughts are a little bit different here, because I think that for the most part, yes, the Braves are done adding. You are in a situation where the Braves have added, between minor league pickups and things like that, a ton of quantity, right? We've talked about this on the show before. Look at the rotation, okay? We know that you need between 10 and 13 starters for a regular season. That's how many you've used each of the last 4 years. Even after Connor Gillespie was claimed by, I think, the Marlins, you can look and you can point out 10, 11 starters between the majors and your 40-man roster guys in Gwinnett, not counting prospect debuts. Now, are there questions about all of these guys? Yes. None of these things are sure things, but you have quantity. And if you add anybody, it needs to be a quality add. Bullpen, same way. We broke this down in yesterday's show, talking about the non-roster invitees for spring, how your top 5 in the bullpen are pretty much set. Obviously, Joe Jimenez is not going to be available. And then you've got 10 different candidates for the final 2 or 3 spots. Similar situation, where why add one more to make it 7 candidates for 3 spots or 8 candidates for 3 spots? It would be better if you go out and get a guy. It needs to be a guy that you know would take a spot. And the issue you have right now is, on the free agent market, there's just not a ton of quality left. Max Scherzer, who some people think is quality, I personally don't really think Scherzer is going to be worth $15.5 million next year. But Max Scherzer signed with the Blue Jays. Okay, so if you're looking at starters, who could you sign that you know would be a starting pitcher for you? Let's go with the WAR over the last 2 seasons. Jack Flaherty's out there, 5 WAR over the last 2 years per Fangraphs. Kyle Gibson, 4 WAR over the last 2 years. Andrew Heaney, is he a no-doubt postseason starter, or is he a number 5? You've got lots of options to be a number 5, right? Bullpen, same situation. Let's look at the bullpen here. Okay, Tanner Scott gone, Jeff Hoffman gone, Aroldis Chapman gone, Clay Holmes going to be a starter, Estevez just signed, David Robertson, maybe 3 WAR over the last 2 years, maybe Kenley Jansen. That's actually one that I would be in favor of, and that's going to come up later. Actually, a different question. That's going to come up later. But for the most part, free agency's picked over, and the quality at the top is gone. And spending more money and potentially not resetting the CBT just to add, I don't know, Andrew Heaney, is that worth it? Is the addition of Andrew Heaney really going to move the needle that much at the end of the day? I don't think it will. A similar situation in the bullpen. Is it worth not resetting the CBT to add Ryan Yarbrough, to add Andrew Chafin? I don't know. But if you can get a guy that you know for a fact will be a difference maker, maybe Ryan Helsley is available via trade. The Cardinals haven't really done anything to cut payroll this year. And I do think the trade market is the only place you're really going to see Atlanta make any meaningful moves. They'll obviously be in on guys who get DFA'd or go to free agency late in spring training. They always are. They added Jesse Chavez at the very end of spring last year. So they'll always be in on those guys. But I think they're really only going to, or it really only makes sense to be in on an addition if it's a quality ad, and most of those are going to be via trade. We talked about Dylan Cease versus Michael King on Wednesday. Maybe they're in on Cease or on King. Supposedly, I think the Mets are in on Cease right now as well. So that might be another incentive to get a deal done as you keep him away from the New York Mets. Some of the names bandied about as potentially being in that package are better than a lot of what Atlanta can offer, but we'll see what the Padres go for. Am I fine adding to Dylan Cease? Yeah. Am I fine not resetting the CBT to add Dylan Cease or Michael King to this roster? I am. Because I do think they're difference makers. I do think that is a quality ad over a quantity ad. But everybody begging Atlanta to go out and spend more money to add random starting pitcher here that's you're expected to be a 4 or a 5, in my mind, isn't worth it. You have lots of guys who can be 4s and 5s, right? Grant Holmes can be a 5. It's entirely possible AJ Smith-Shawver can be a 5. Maybe Bryce Elder can rebound to be a 5. You have plenty of guys who can be in the back end of your rotation. It's only worth making additional moves if you can get a guy who can be towards the top of the rotation. Same thing for the bullpen. Is it worth making a free agent signing to get a guy to pitch in the 6th inning? I don't think so. If you're going to get a high leverage reliever, get a guy who can pitch in the 8th. Get a guy who maybe can come in the 7th to shut a rally down and stick around for the 8th, right? That's where I am. It feels like the Braves are done adding quantity this offseason, but they'll still make a move on a quality player if that player comes available and the price goes. We'll see what happens. Speaking of Dylan Cease, another question here: why trade for Dylan Cease when he's abysmal in the playoffs? What? Okay. Dylan Cease is 0-1 with a 12.91 ERA in the postseason. He's also thrown 7 2/3 innings. It's really hard to draw meaningful conclusions off of 7 2/3 innings. He's allowed 8 runs in 2 postseason starts. Both of those came last year. Both of those came against the Dodgers, who won the World Series. And if you dig into how those runs were scored, it's kind of hard to be mad at Dylan Cease for this. Of those 8 runs, 3 came by a Shohei Ohtani home run. You gave up a home run to to last year's MVP. Oh no, what a terrible pitcher. One of those runs came off of Mookie Betts' home run. Oh no, you gave up a home run to a former MVP. What a terrible pitcher. Another one of those runs came on an Ohtani single. And then the other 3 were scored after he left the game. It was inherited runners that came around to score. One of them was a Mookie Betts single. One of them was a Teoscar Hernandez single. And one of them scored on a wild pitch thrown by the reliever. One, it's an incredibly small sample size. That is not representative at all of Dylan Cease's actual skill level. 2, the runs he did allow were to the World Series champions, to 2 of their best players. Shohei Ohtani got 4 of those 8 runs. Mookie resulted in 2 of the last 4. 6 of the 8 runs were to either the MVP or a former MVP who bats right behind the MVP. It's kind of hard to be mad about that. End of the day, 7 2/3 innings, you can't draw meaningful conclusions off of that. It is much more relevant to talk about how Dylan Cease has made 30-plus starts in each of the last 4 seasons. How he was able to throw a no-hitter last year. That is more important than the small sample size of the postseason. Snit said this. Everybody said this. The postseason's almost a different sport at this point. It is so different from the regular season that you can't draw meaningful conclusions off of 7 2/3 innings. In just a minute, a question about Sean Murphy. Really interesting here. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Links in the episode description, promo code BRAVES. When you can get a free play, and when you make your first deposit, up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Really love Underdog Fantasy. The way this works is you go and look at all of their statistical projections for whatever sporting event or combination of sporting events you want to make predictions at, right? Maybe it's NBA. Maybe it's the Super Bowl. Maybe it's college basketball. You go in there, you look at all the players, you choose higher or lower on their statistical projections, you build your lineup, and depending on how many players are in there and which of their projections you make a selection on, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. It's available just about all over Braves country. Hate it for you, Mississippi, but everybody else, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama. We've had Braves fans reach out who are as far away as California, who are in Virginia. Shout out Richmond, former Richmond Braves. Again, links in the episode description, promo code BRAVES. When you make your first deposit, you get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Try out Underdog Fantasy today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby answering your questions about the Atlanta Braves and how things stand as we're just a couple weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. I got a question about, in light of the Braves not wanting to put Drake Baldwin into a trade package, does that kind of maybe signal that they're quietly concerned about Sean Murphy? I think 2 things can be true at once here. That's just, you'll learn, that's one of our favorite sayings. Shout out to a friend of the show, Daryl Dapprich there. The first thing is Sean Murphy has struggled at times in Atlanta because of injury and other off-the-field things, right? He talked about fatigue down the stretch in 2023, acclimating to the Atlanta Heat for the first time. He also did deal, I think it was the minor hamstring thing during that stretch as well. Remember, there was like a week where Chadwick Tromp was up and we had no backup infielder. There was a whole story that was written about if there were an injury, Austin Riley, who was the backup at each position. Austin Riley would have shifted to third. Travis d'Arnaud was your backup. I think maybe your backup third baseman was Travis d'Arnaud. Eddie Rosario was your backup second baseman. Marcell Ozuna would have had to step into first base. There was a whole like thing written about who would play where if somebody got hurt while Murphy was on the bench and not playing in 23. 24, obviously, the oblique injury, and was just never really right the rest of the year. He couldn't catch up to fastballs. Oblique injuries are really tough on a hitter. Chris Towers of CBS Sports, when he came on here a couple weeks ago, talked about Murphy and about how it makes sense that he would have struggled last year. So I do think that there's not concern that he's not a good player, but it would make sense if there were a little bit of concern about Sean Murphy staying fully healthy, especially if you are ramping up his playtime and expecting him to start 4 out of every 5 games. Like, it would be foolish not to think there was a little bit of, okay, we need to have a really good backup plan because he has gotten hurt in the past in Atlanta. At the same time, because again, 2 things can be true at once, Drake Baldwin's a special player. In AAA last year, 90th percentile exit velocity of 106.5. MLB average is like 102, 103. So he's hitting the ball well above average from a power perspective. From an approach perspective, his chase rate's right there around 20%. He's making lots of contact in the zone. Drake Baldwin looks like he could be a very good major league hitter. We've talked about this at length in the past. there's a chance your designated hitter role is open next season. Marcell Ozuna's in that club option year. He could conceivably be done after this season. And we've seen Atlanta teams make it work with an offensive-oriented backup catcher, William Contreras. And a lot of people complained and said that Atlanta made the wrong move in trading away William Contreras to get Sean Murphy. And you have to understand that some of the defensive complaints behind Contreras not being a good blocker, some of the pitching staff didn't like throwing to him, they didn't like his game calling, some of that stuff. It made sense why they made the deal in retrospect, although a lot of people still think Atlanta lost that trade. One of the few trades they would have lost since he's been here. But you can see how you have to have a reliable backup plan for Sean Murphy, given his past injuries. But also, Drake Baldwin looks like he could be a very promising hitter, and you don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. I don't necessarily think they're concerned about Sean Murphy when he's healthy. When he's fully healthy, he is a good hitter. When he's playing almost every day, he is impactful. Remember that stretch when Travis d'Arnaud was out early in 23 with that concussion? Murphy started almost every game of 25 in that time span and hit like 300. When he is on, he is very good. It's just health more so than skill. So I think they can be cautious of the health without being concerned about how good Sean Murphy is as a player, if that makes sense. So two things true at once there, right? They don't want to trade Baldwin. They think he could be special. He'll also be cheap next year, by the way. He'll league minimum. Okay? Keep that in mind. But they also just want to have a high-quality backup plan if Murphy has to miss a month with an injury. Another question here, would you take back any former players who were available? And he gave some names because he worded this as former players who didn't quite work out. He said Touki Toussaint, Kobe Allard, Jason Hayward, and Julio Teheran. We talked about Teheran in the third segment yesterday. I'd argue he started like 5 straight opening days for you. He's one of the leaders in WAR out of Colombia. I'd argue he worked out perfectly fine for where the team was during that stretch. But would I take back any of those former players? Of those 4, probably not. I wouldn't mind if Touki rejoined the organization. I don't think he would try to put him back into a starting role. But really, those aren't the 4 that I would really want. If I wanted a former player, I think it'd be Kenley Jansen. He does give you, with the injury to Joe Jimenez and AJ Minter having left, if Raisel Iglesias were to get hurt this year, it's not immediately obvious who would be the new closer. Desabar Hernandez has the stuff. He doesn't have the experience closing games in the majors. He's done it some in the minors. I don't really know who would be the immediate closer. Kenley Jansen would be some Iglesias injury insurance, as well as reinforcing the Curacao connection that you've beefed up by adding Jurickson Profar pairing him with Ozzy Albies. If I were to bring back a former player who is still playing right now, within reason, right? We're not bringing back Freddie Freeman. He's signed to a long-term deal. A player who is available, a former Brave who is still in the league, Kenley Jansen's probably the one I'd bring back. Simply because he gives you, worst case scenario, he's a really high-quality setup man in the 8th, and he gives you insurance if Iglesias gets hurt. So I think that's the one I would bring back. If you have a better name of a former Braves player who's still active that Atlanta should bring back, again, available. We're not getting Dansby Swanson back. He's in a long-term deal. We're not getting Freddie Freeman back. But a guy who is available, let me know. Comments down below if you're on YouTube. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. I want to hear from you. Who would you bring back to this Atlanta Braves roster? Who's currently available? Who's played for us in the past? In just a moment, great question from my guy Jeff on YouTube about Lucas Braun. We'll get to that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of the Friday show of Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby going through your questions. And Jeff on YouTube asked about Lucas Braun, some of my impressions of him, and maybe what it would take for him to debut at the major league level this year. 2023 sixth rounder out of Cal Straight Northridge. I like Lucas Braun. Full disclosure, I like Lucas Braun. The thing, I actually, back in September, I called him one of the breakout prospects of this season. Just really was impressed with what he was able to do in the minors. 162 strikeouts last year. He one of only 3 Braves minor leaguers to hit that total in a season since 2019. Ian Anderson and Royber Salinas were the other 2, by the way, who are both in the organization again, so with Salinas coming back. Finished the year 9-4 with a 3.26 ERA. Again, 162 strikeouts, so 10.1 per 9, and 143 and 2/3 innings. 42 walks, so 2.6 per 9, and 11 home runs allowed, 0.7 home runs per 9 innings. The thing about Lucas Braun, okay? Nothing is elite in the package. I like what he does. Fastball sits 93 or so. He can touch 96 with it, and he pounded the zone last year, like 70% strikes with that fastball. He's really good at getting ahead in the count, using the fastball early to get ahead in the count, and then he can whip out a trio of secondaries. Slider in the mid-80s, curveball in the low 80s, and then a changeup in the mid-80s. It's really just for lefties, from what I remember watching of him. None of the stuff is elite, but I mentioned the walk rate, 2.6 walks per 9 innings. He has really good command. He has really good control. Because of that, he can get ahead of hitters and can get outs and can rack up outs in a hurry. I want to see his stuff against AAA hitters, okay? Because I do think there are some tendencies that major leaguers could take advantage of. Again, he's fastball heavy early in counts. He throws the fastball in the zone a lot. And it doesn't get destroyed, but I do think the movement profile isn't exceptional enough for major league hitters to not be able to get their fair share of hits off of it. So I want to see how he does against AAA hitters. I am a believer in Lucas Braun. I did have him on my short list of probably 3 prospects that if you had to call a prospect up to make a start this year, that he would be one of those prospects, right? Drew Hackenberg's in there. Lucas Braun is one of the 3. Royber Salinas is technically still a prospect. He's probably the 3rd, although if Ian Meha got a chance to make a start, it wouldn't blow my mind. But yeah, I'm a believer in Lucas Braun. I just need to see his stuff work against AAA hitters, or maybe see an uptick in the stuff to know that he's going to be able to make it at the major league level. I still think 26 is more likely than 25. I think some evidence of that is they didn't invite any of those prospects other than Salinas to spring training, right? Hackenberg's not invited. Braun's not invited to major league spring training. None of these guys were in our eyes. I think that's where you are with that. I do like him, though. Again, I do Lucas Braun. I do think he can shove. When he was at San Diego, they used him mostly in relief. I think he started 1 game in 2 seasons at San Diego. And then Cal State Northridge was like, nah, buddy, you're a starter. And he went out there and put up a 2.91 ERA. They recognized the talent, and it got him drafted, again, in the top couple rounds. And it has him on the verge of a debut, I'd say, between now and 2026. His Rule 5 status, he doesn't have to be added to the 40-man roster until December of 2026. Matter of fact, we should probably do a newsletter article on here's the guys who are 25 Rule 5 eligible and what they need to do this year to get protected in December. That'd be a fun one to do. So thank you for the question, Jeff. Gave me a good idea there. Another question, final question here. Should the Braves open extension talks with their players? And he suggested 3 people: Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Chris Sale. With Chris Sale, I'm gonna say no, right? They signed him to a deal just last offseason, 2 years, $38 million. They have a club option for $18 million in 2026. That's Sale's age 37 season. I can absolutely see a situation where if Sale stays healthy through 25. Then they do like they did with Ronaldo Lopez or Aaron Bummer, and they give him a new deal in lieu of picking up the club option. And maybe they guarantee 26 and add a club option in 27. Travis d'Arnaud had a deal like that where they picked up an option with a guaranteed year and then gave him a club option for the next year. I could see a situation like that. And then after that, maybe going on a year-to-year thing like Charlie Morton was for a little while in there. Just like a rolling, here's the amount. Okay, cool. As long as you're cool with it, we'll just keep rolling this over year after year. As long as you want to keep pitching, you're healthy, we'll just keep rolling this over as long as you're effective. I could see something like that. Do I think if they gave him a new deal, it would go up from $22 million to 25? It would go up from an $18 million club option to 26? I do. He probably would get the $22 million that everybody else gets, but I don't think you're extending him just yet. Ozzie Albies is the better question of the two, I think, because this is actually the final guaranteed year of his deal. He has club options for 26 and for 27 at $7 million. There is a $4 million buyout. It would be very difficult for Atlanta to just move on from Ozzie Albies this year. I can't imagine after this season what it would have to look like for Atlanta to move on from Ozzie Albies. But what I think would probably happen if Atlanta were to extend Ozzie Albies is it would be after the first club option in 26 was picked up, and either during that 26 season, maybe in spring of 26, or going like at the end of the 26 season in lieu of picking up the 2027 club option for his age 30 season, in lieu of that picking up that option, them turning around and giving him some sort of extension. I will say, we've talked about this before, I am really curious to see where Ozzie plays. His arm strength has continued to drop. It is the worst arm strength of anybody at second base. It's worse than a lot of first basemen. He obviously doesn't have the physical stature for first base. You have that filled. I do think there is a world where Ozzie Albies ends up DHing more than he plays the field as soon as 2026. I think there's a scenario where in 2026, depending on who's at second base, right? 26 or 27 or whatever, Ozzie Albies is DHing more than he's at second simply because his arm strength continues to get worse. And it's already one of the worst arms in baseball. What it's going to do is he gets into his 30s. So he's probably the one that I think is most at risk of either not getting extended or getting extended but no longer playing the field that much. For Ronald, I do see where people have asked to move him to DH and things like that. His arm is still an asset in the field. Only one of those two injuries came when he was playing the field. The other one was running the bases. So a move to DH wouldn't help that. But he's also signed guaranteed years in 25 and 26 at $17 million. And then 2 club options for 27 and 28 at $17 million. He's not a free agent until 2029. I think the way this would go, Sale would get some sort of extension first. Because again, club option year is the first one to come around. Or he would hit free agency first. Sale is the first one to get some sort of extension. Then if you're going to extend Albies, then he'd get his. And then Acuna would get his. I don't expect them to address Acuna until the guaranteed years are done, right? There's no need to give him an extended deal when he still has 4 years of team control counting this season at $17 million. There's no reason to do it other than just placating him, he has given no impression that he is not happy at all. Not really a huge reason to give him an extension right now. I think the order would be Sale, Albies, Acuna, but I'm really curious to see what happens to Ozzie Albies on that. This has been Braves Today for Friday, January 31st. We're back on Monday, barring some sort of wild... If Dylan Cease gets traded, folks, we're going to go live at some point in time this weekend, okay? Just be ready for that. In the meantime, you're listening on audio. Do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when we drop the next episode. Until then, this has been Braves Today.